At a glamorous billionaire gala, a powerful CEO forced his pregnant wife onto the stage to humiliate her. But the moment she began to sing, the entire room fell silent. And by the time she finished, the whole room was in tears and a billionaire in the audience stood up with a promise that would change her life forever. Hello fam, welcome to True Love Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones. Thank you as you do so. Now relax, let's dive into the story. Lena Hart had once believed that love could change everything. Growing up in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, she had learned early in life that nothing came easy. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse's aide, and Lena often helped raise her younger siblings while still managing to excel in school. Despite the struggles, their home was always filled with warmth, laughter, and music. Lena loved to sing while helping her mother cook or cleaning the small apartment they shared. Her voice had always been special. People at church used to say it carried something deeper than just sound. It carried soul. But Lena had never dreamed that one day she would marry one of the most powerful men in the country. Adrian Cole was a name that commanded attention. A self-made black billionaire and CEO of Cole Industries, Adrian had built an empire in technology and real estate before the age of 40. His story was admired by many. A man who rose from poverty to unimaginable wealth through intelligence, discipline, and relentless ambition. Magazines called him the Titan of modern business. To Lena, when they first met, he seemed like something even greater. They met at a charity fundraiser where Lena had been volunteering. She was helping organize guests when Adrian approached her, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that made him stand out effortlessly among the crowd. Instead of speaking to the wealthy donors and executives surrounding him, Adrian struck up a conversation with Lena. He asked about her life, her dreams, and what she enjoyed doing. Over the next few weeks, Adrian began reaching out more often. Expensive dinners, long conversations, flowers delivered to her apartment, surprise visits to the community center where she volunteered. It felt like something out of a movie. To Lena, Adrian seemed thoughtful, attentive, and protective. He spoke passionately about his struggles growing up and how important it was for Black success stories to inspire the next generation. When he asked her to marry him less than a year later, Lena felt like her life had become a miracle she had never expected. But miracles, she would later learn, sometimes come with shadows. The first signs were subtle. After their wedding, Lena moved into Adrian's massive penthouse overlooking downtown. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, and a view of the city lights that stretched for miles. But the warmth she had once felt around Adrian began to fade. He started correcting the way she spoke during public events. "You need to sound more refined," he once told her after a dinner party. Another time, he frowned when she laughed loudly with guests. A CEO's wife should carry herself with more grace. At first, Lena brushed it off. Adrian lived under constant pressure, she told herself. Being in the spotlight must be difficult. But the criticism slowly turned sharper. He began making comments about her background. "You're lucky I found you," he once said casually during breakfast. "Most women from where you grew up never get opportunities like this." Those words lingered in her mind long after he left for work. Months passed and Adrian grew colder. He spent most of his time at the office or traveling for business. When he was home, he often treated Lena more like a decorative accessory than a partner. At social events, he expected perfection. Behind closed doors, he barely acknowledged her presence. Still, Lena held on to hope. She remembered the man who had once looked at her with admiration and warmth. She believed that man was still somewhere inside Adrian. Then one morning, everything changed. Lena stared at the pregnancy test in disbelief as two bright lines appeared. Her hands trembled as she sat on the edge of the bathroom counter, emotions rushing through her all at once: joy, fear, excitement, and hope. Maybe this was the blessing their marriage needed. That evening, she prepared Adrian's favorite dinner and waited nervously for him to return home. When he finally walked in, still speaking on his phone about a business deal, Lena could barely contain her excitement. "Adrian," she said softly after he hung up, "I have something important to tell you." He looked at her impatiently. "Make it quick. I still have work to finish." Taking a deep breath, Lena smiled. "We're having a baby." For a brief moment, Adrian simply stared at her. Instead of joy, his expression hardened. A baby, he repeated slowly. Lena's smile faded as the silence stretched between them. That wasn't part of the plan, Adrian said flatly. The words hit her like ice. I thought you'd be happy, she said quietly. Adrian sighed, loosening his tie as if the news had burdened him. Pregnancy will change your appearance, he muttered. You have appearances to maintain at events. Lena felt her heart sink. Rather than becoming gentler, Adrian seemed even more irritated by her presence as the weeks passed. He complained about her fatigue, mocked the way pregnancy affected her body, and began excluding her from important gatherings. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, Lena would catch a strange expression on his face, almost as if he regretted the life they had built together. Late at night, when Adrian returned home long after midnight, Lena often lay awake in the enormous bedroom that felt colder than ever. She would rest her hand on her growing belly and whisper softly to the child inside her. You are loved, she would say. But as the months passed, one painful question began echoing louder and louder in her heart. If Adrian despised her so much, why had he married her in the first place? Lena didn't know it yet. But the answer to that question, and the strength she didn't realize she possessed, would soon change her life forever. Winter had just begun to settle over the city when Adrian Cole announced one of the most important events of the year for his company, the coal industry's annual charity gala. Every year, the event attracted the most powerful names in business, politics, entertainment, and philanthropy. It was a night of flashing cameras, glittering gowns, and million-dollar donations. News outlets covered every detail, from the guest list to the designer outfits worn by the elite. For Adrian, the gala wasn't just about charity. It was about power. And as his wife, Lena was expected to stand beside him as the perfect symbol of success. The week leading up to the event was exhausting for her. At nearly 6 months pregnant, Lena's body felt heavier each day. Her back ached constantly, and even standing for long periods made her dizzy. Still, Adrian insisted she attend. You can't skip the biggest event of the year, he said coldly when she mentioned she wasn't feeling well. People expect to see us together. So Lena spent hours preparing. A professional stylist arrived at the penthouse early that afternoon. Adrian had already chosen the dress for her, a deep emerald green evening gown designed to hug her figure. Though elegant, the dress felt tight against her growing stomach. When Lena looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled into soft waves that framed her face beautifully. But beneath the glamour, there was exhaustion in her eyes. Downstairs, Adrian waited impatiently. He stood near the door in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, scrolling through messages on his phone. When Lena finally walked down the staircase, he glanced up briefly. For a moment, there was silence. You took long enough, he said. Lena's shoulders sank slightly. You look fine, he added flatly, already turning toward the door. Not beautiful. Not radiant. Just fine. The gala was held at the luxurious Grand Regent Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. As Adrian's black limousine pulled up to the entrance, camera flashes exploded like bursts of lightning. Reporters called his name while photographers captured every step. Mr. Cole. Over here. Adrian, look this way. Lena forced a polite smile as Adrian wrapped an arm around her waist for the cameras. To the public eye, they looked like the perfect couple, wealthy, powerful, and glamorous. But the warmth of his hand disappeared the moment they entered the ballroom. Inside, the space looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the towering ceiling, casting soft golden light across the room. Tables decorated with white roses and candles filled the hall, and a grand stage stood at the front with a live orchestra playing gentle jazz melodies. The room buzzed with conversations between CEOs, celebrities, and influential leaders. Many guests greeted Adrian warmly as he moved through the crowd. Adrian, incredible year for your company. Your expansion into Europe was brilliant. You're changing the game. Lena walked beside him quietly, smiling when necessary, speaking when spoken to. But Adrian barely acknowledged her presence. At one point, a kind older woman approached Lena and touched her arm gently. You look beautiful, dear, she said warmly. And congratulations on the baby. Lena smiled gratefully. Thank you. Before she could say more, Adrian interrupted. We should keep moving, he said sharply. As the night continued, Lena's feet began to ache. She discreetly sat down at one of the tables while Adrian spoke with investors nearby. She watched the room quietly, feeling like an outsider in her own life. That was when she noticed a man across the ballroom observing the crowd calmly. He sat alone at a table near the front, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit. His presence wasn't loud like many of the other billionaires in the room, but there was something about his quiet confidence that stood out. This was Victor Laurent, though Lena didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, Adrian eventually stepped onto the stage to begin the evening's main program. The orchestra quieted as he took the microphone. Good evening, everyone, he announced smoothly. Applause filled the room. Adrian was an excellent speaker. Confident, charismatic, and commanding. He spoke about the success of coal industries, the importance of giving back to the community, and the millions of dollars raised for charity. The audience listened with admiration. Then Adrian paused. A slow smile spread across his face. And tonight, he continued, I'd like to share something special with you all. Lena felt a strange knot tighten in her stomach. Adrian's eyes searched the room until they landed on her. My wife, Lena, actually has a hidden talent, he said. Several guests turned toward her with curiosity. Lena froze. Adrian gestured toward the stage. She loves to sing. A few people clapped politely, assuming it was a sweet surprise. But Lena's heart began pounding. Adrian had never asked her to sing publicly before. In fact, he had once told her that performing would make her look unprofessional. Come on up here, Lena, he said, his voice carrying through the ballroom. Her body felt suddenly heavy. The room waited. Hundreds of eyes stared in her direction. Lena slowly stood, her hands trembling slightly as she walked toward the stage. As she climbed the steps, Adrian leaned closer and whispered so only she could hear. Don't embarrass me. The words cut deeper than any insult. He handed her the microphone and stepped aside, watching with a faint smirk. To Adrian, this was entertainment. He expected her voice to shake. He expected awkwardness, maybe even failure. But Lena stood there quietly, the bright stage lights warming her face. For a brief moment, the humiliation felt overwhelming. She could run. She could hand back the microphone. She could disappear into the crowd. But then she felt a small movement in her belly. Her baby. Slowly, Lena lifted the microphone. She closed her eyes. And then she began to sing. The first note floated gently through the ballroom. Soft. Clear. Beautiful. Within seconds, the room fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Because the woman Adrian Cole had just tried to humiliate possessed a voice no one in the room would ever forget. The first note Lena sang floated through the ballroom like a whisper carried by the wind. Soft. Pure. Unshaken. At first, the guests listened politely, expecting a brief, nervous performance from a woman who had been suddenly pushed onto the stage. Some lifted their glasses again, assuming the moment would pass quickly. But then Lena sang the second line. And the third. Her voice grew stronger, richer, filling the massive ballroom with a depth of emotion that immediately captured everyone's attention. The orchestra behind her hesitated at first, surprised by the unexpected performance. Then the pianist gently followed her melody, adding soft chords beneath her voice. Within seconds, the entire room became still. The chatter stopped. Forks and glasses paused midair. Even the waiters froze where they stood. Because Lena's voice was extraordinary. It wasn't just technically beautiful. It carried something deeper. Pain. Strength. Truth. She sang a slow, soulful ballad. The lyrics told the story of a woman who loved deeply, but felt invisible inside her own home. A woman who carried hope in her heart while silently enduring loneliness and heartbreak. Every word felt personal. Every note sounded like a piece of her life. I gave my heart to a house of gold. But the walls were cold, the nights were cold. Her voice trembled slightly on one line, not from fear, but from emotion. Several guests began exchanging quiet glances. They could feel it. This was not just a performance. This was a confession wrapped in music. At the back of the room, a woman quietly wiped a tear from her cheek. At another table, a couple stopped whispering and leaned forward, completely absorbed in the song. Lena stood under the bright lights, one hand gently resting over her growing belly as she sang the next verse. Still I carry tomorrow inside my soul. A little life, a little hope to hold. The meaning was impossible to ignore. Many people in the room suddenly remembered the rumors about Adrian's cold personality, the way Lena was rarely seen speaking during events, the distant way he often treated her. Across the ballroom, Victor Laurent sat perfectly still. He had attended hundreds of galas in his life. He had seen performances by world-famous singers and orchestras. But nothing had ever moved him quite like this moment. Because Lena wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply telling the truth. Victor's sharp eyes shifted briefly toward Adrian, who stood near the side of the stage. The billionaire CEO's expression had changed completely. The smug confidence he once wore had disappeared. Instead, his jaw tightened as the audience became more captivated by Lena with every passing second. This was not what he expected. He thought she would stumble. He thought she would panic. He thought the room would laugh politely and forget the moment within minutes. Instead, she had taken control of the entire evening. And worse, people were beginning to look at him differently. Back on stage, Lena sang the final verse. Her voice rose higher now, stronger than before, echoing against the high ceilings of the ballroom. It carried a quiet power that felt almost unbreakable. One day the cage will open wide, and I will walk into the light. As she held the final note, the sound lingered in the air like a fading sunrise. Then silence. For a long moment, no one moved. The room seemed frozen in the emotion of the song. Lena slowly lowered the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't planned the performance. She hadn't rehearsed. But somehow, everything she had kept hidden inside her heart had found its way into the music. Then suddenly, someone began to clap. The sound echoed loudly through the ballroom. It was Victor Laurent. He stood slowly from his seat, applauding with genuine admiration. Within seconds, others joined him. Then more, and more, until the entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The sound grew so loud it filled every corner of the hall. Some guests even rose to their feet. Lena blinked in disbelief as she looked across the crowd. She hadn't expected praise. She had only needed the courage to sing. But now people were looking at her with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect, admiration, even compassion. Victor continued clapping, his expression thoughtful and deeply moved. This woman, he murmured quietly to himself, has a voice the world needs to hear. Meanwhile, Adrian stood near the stage, his hands stiff at his sides. To everyone else, the applause celebrated Lena. To him, it felt like humiliation. Because for the first time in years, Adrian Cole was no longer the most powerful person in the room. His wife, the woman he had tried to belittle, had captured the hearts of everyone present. And she had done it without even trying. As the applause slowly faded, Lena stepped away from the microphone, preparing to leave the stage. But as she turned, her eyes briefly met Adrian's. There was anger burning in his gaze. Cold, sharp, dangerous. And Lena knew immediately that the moment the gala ended, she would have to face his fury. But across the room, Victor Laurent was already walking toward the stage. And though Lena didn't realize it yet, the quiet billionaire had just made a decision that would change her life forever. The applause slowly faded, but the emotional weight of Lena's performance still lingered in the ballroom like the echo of a powerful storm. Guests continued whispering among themselves, many glancing toward the stage where Lena stood momentarily frozen, overwhelmed by what had just happened. For the first time in a very long time, people were not looking at Adrian Cole. They were looking at her. Lena carefully stepped down from the stage, her heart still racing. She avoided looking toward Adrian as she moved through the crowd, unsure of what awaited her next. But before she could reach the hallway, Adrian's voice cut through the noise behind her. Lena. The single word was sharp enough to make her stop. She slowly turned around. Adrian was already walking toward her, his face stiff with barely contained anger. To anyone else watching, he might have looked calm. But Lena knew that expression very well. It was the face he wore when he was furious but trying to keep control in public. Several guests nearby grew quiet as they sensed the tension. Adrian stopped just a few feet from her. What exactly was that supposed to be? He asked quietly, his voice tight. Lena swallowed, trying to keep her composure. You asked me to sing, she replied softly. Adrian leaned closer, his words barely above a whisper. You made me look like a fool up there. The accusation stunned her. I didn't. Enough, he snapped under his breath. We'll talk about this at home. The threat hung heavily between them. Lena's chest tightened with anxiety. She knew Adrian's temper, and the thought of facing him later that night made her stomach twist with dread. But before Adrian could say another word, a calm voice spoke from behind them. I believe the lady gave one of the most remarkable performances this room has ever heard. Both of them turned. Standing a few steps away was the man Lena had noticed earlier across the ballroom. Victor Laurent. Though his presence was quiet, there was something undeniably commanding about him. His posture was relaxed, but the confidence in his eyes made it clear he was not someone easily dismissed. Adrian immediately recognized him. Victor Laurent was one of the wealthiest investors in the country, a billionaire known not only for his business success, but also for his philanthropy and influence in global finance. Adrian forced a polite smile. Victor, he said smoothly, I didn't realize you were attending tonight. Victor extended his hand calmly. I rarely miss events that support good causes, he replied. The two men shook hands, though the gesture felt more formal than friendly. Victor then turned his attention to Lena. His expression softened. Mrs. Cole, he said respectfully, your voice is extraordinary. Lena felt her cheeks warm slightly. Thank you, she said quietly. I meant what I said, Victor continued. That performance carried more honesty than most speeches I've heard in years. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. It was just a small surprise for the guests, he said quickly. Victor's gaze moved toward him. Yes, he said calmly. I noticed. There was a subtle weight behind those words. For a moment, the silence between the two men felt heavy. Victor had witnessed Adrian's whisper on stage earlier. He had seen the tension in Lena's eyes, and he was far too observant to ignore the story hidden beneath the music. Adrian cleared his throat. Well, we appreciate your kind words, he said. If you'll excuse us, Lena and I have other guests to greet. But Victor didn't move aside. Instead, he looked directly at Lena. Mrs. Cole, he said gently, may I speak with you for a moment later this evening? There's something important I'd like to discuss with you. Adrian's smile faded slightly. What kind of discussion? He asked. Victor's response was simple. A private one. The tension in the air grew thicker. Adrian clearly didn't like the idea, but refusing a request from someone as influential as Victor Laurent would attract unwanted attention. After a brief pause, Adrian forced another smile. Of course, he said. Victor nodded politely before walking away. The rest of the gala passed in an uneasy blur. Guests continued approaching Lena to compliment her performance. Many spoke warmly to her, something that rarely happened during previous events. Adrian remained polite in public, but Lena could feel the anger radiating from him like heat from a fire. Finally, as the evening began winding down, one of the event staff quietly approached Lena. Mr. Laurent is waiting for you in the garden lounge, the woman said softly. Lena hesitated for a moment before making her way outside. The garden lounge was a quiet, glass-covered terrace behind the hotel ballroom. Soft lights glowed along the walls, and the cool night air carried the faint scent of roses from the surrounding planters. Victor stood near the railing overlooking the city skyline. When Lena stepped outside, he turned to face her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor said something that surprised her. You sang like someone who has been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. Lena looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to cause trouble tonight, she said softly. Victor shook his head. You didn't cause trouble, he replied. You revealed the truth. His voice was calm but firm. I've spent many years working with organizations that help women escape difficult and dangerous situations, he continued. And I've learned to recognize certain signs. Lena's heart began to race. Victor's gaze remained kind but serious. You don't have to explain anything to me, he said. But if you ever feel unsafe or trapped, you should know that you're not alone. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a small card. On it were the contact details of a legal firm and a women's support foundation that Victor personally funded. They specialize in helping women rebuild their lives, he explained. Lawyers, counselors, financial advisors. Everything someone might need to start over safely. Lena stared at the card in silence. No one had ever spoken to her this way before. No one had ever offered help without expecting something in return. I don't even know why you're doing this, she whispered. Victor gave a small smile. Because I have a daughter, he said simply. The answer caught her off guard. And if she were ever in pain, he continued quietly, I would hope someone would have the courage to help her. Emotion tightened Lena's throat. For the first time in years, she felt something she had nearly forgotten. Hope. Victor gently added one more sentence before leaving. You deserve a life where your voice is not silenced. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Lena remained alone on the terrace, holding the small card tightly in her hand. Inside the ballroom, Adrian Cole was already looking for her. But for the first time since their marriage began, Lena realized something powerful. She was no longer completely alone. And somewhere deep inside her heart, the door to a new life had just begun to open. The ride home from the gala was silent. The black limousine moved smoothly through the glowing city streets. But inside the vehicle the tension felt thick enough to suffocate. Lena sat quietly by the window, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The card Victor Laurent had given her was hidden safely inside her clutch purse. She could feel its presence there, like a tiny spark of courage she wasn't ready to let go of. Across from her, Adrian stared down at his phone, his jaw clenched tightly. He hadn't said a single word since they left the hotel. But Lena knew the silence wasn't peace. It was a storm waiting to break. When the limousine finally stopped in front of their penthouse building, Adrian stepped out first without offering her a hand. Lena followed slowly, exhaustion pulling at her body after the long evening. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt even heavier. The moment the doors opened and they stepped inside, Adrian's patience snapped. What exactly were you trying to do tonight? He demanded sharply. Lena turned to face him, startled by the sudden explosion. I only sang because you told me to, she said quietly. That wasn't singing, Adrian snapped. That was a performance designed to make people feel sorry for you. His voice echoed through the large living room. You turned the entire room against me. Lena felt something inside her shift. For months she had stayed quiet. She had endured his insults, his coldness, his dismissive attitude. But tonight something had changed. No, she said softly but firmly. I told the truth. Adrian stared at her as if he didn't recognize the woman standing before him. You're overreacting, he scoffed. You live in a penthouse, wear designer clothes, and have access to anything you want. Except kindness, Lena replied. The words hung in the air like a sudden crack of thunder. Adrian's expression darkened. If you're unhappy, he said coldly, no one is forcing you to stay. The moment he spoke those words, something inside Lena became crystal clear. For years she had believed she was trapped. But now she realized something different. She had a choice. Without another word, Lena turned and walked quietly to the bedroom. That night, as Adrian slept in another part of the penthouse, Lena sat by the window holding Victor's card in her hand. The city lights flickered across the skyline, reminding her of the stage earlier that evening, the moment when her voice had finally been heard. After a long moment, she picked up her phone, and she made the call. The weeks that followed changed everything. With the help of the legal team Victor had recommended, Lena began the process of leaving Adrian safely and carefully. The lawyers gathered documentation, prepared financial protections, and ensured that both Lena and her unborn child would be secure. Adrian was furious when he learned about the divorce filing. But for the first time, Lena was no longer facing him alone. Victor's foundation provided her with support, legal guidance, and a safe place to stay during the transition. For the first time in years, Lena could breathe without fear. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. One of the guests at the gala had recorded Lena's performance on their phone. The emotional moment, her powerful voice, and the story hidden inside the lyrics spread quietly across social media. Within days, millions of people had watched the video. Comments poured in from strangers all over the world. People were moved by her voice, moved by her strength, moved by the courage of a pregnant woman who had stood under bright lights and turned humiliation into something beautiful. Music producers began reaching out. Charity organizations invited her to perform at their events. But the messages that meant the most to Lena came from ordinary women who said her song gave them the courage to stand up for themselves too. Months later, Lena gave birth to a healthy baby girl. As she held her daughter for the first time, tears filled her eyes. "You'll grow up knowing you are loved," she whispered softly. By then, her life looked completely different. Her divorce from Adrian was finalized, and the scandal surrounding his treatment of her had quietly damaged his reputation. Several business partners distanced themselves from him, unwilling to be connected to the controversy. But Lena focused on something far more important. She began recording music. Her voice, once hidden in a small church choir and nearly silenced inside a troubled marriage, was now reaching audiences across the country. Her songs spoke about resilience, healing, and hope. Victor Laurent remained a supportive mentor and friend, often attending her performances quietly from the audience. One evening, nearly 3 years after the gala, Lena stood backstage at a large charity concert raising funds for women escaping abusive relationships. The crowd outside numbered in the thousands. As she prepared to walk on stage, she glanced at a framed photo sitting on the table beside her. It was a picture of her holding her daughter, both of them smiling brightly. Lena took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The audience erupted into applause. Looking out across the sea of faces, she felt the same warmth she had felt that night at the gala. But this time it wasn't mixed with fear. This time it was freedom. She lifted the microphone and smiled. Years ago, someone had tried to use a stage to humiliate her. Instead, that moment had given her something far greater. It had given her her voice. And now, she was using it to help others find theirs. Finally, we have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.